going up. Elevator Systems. Bowen Family Systems Theory in brief for a life of learning. Welcome to Elevator Systems, a podcast that explores ideas from Bowen Family Systems Theory, where we represent the ideas as clearly and understandably as we can. Today we are looking at the family diagram. My name is Dixie Vandersluis. I'm a counselor and a member of faculty of Living Systems. Katie White is joining me each episode, and she is the executive director of Living Systems and also a marriage and family therapist. Welcome, Katie.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
And our guest today is Avrum Nadigel. Avrum lives in Toronto and is a marriage and family therapist, and I can probably say a lifelong student of Bowen Family Systems Theory. He's authored or co-authored 3 books: Learning to Commit, It Takes More Than Love, a workbook for singles and couples, and Where Would You Like to Start, a master therapist on beginning psychotherapy with families. Avrum has also co-produced 2 podcasts, Pop Parenting and the Love Examined playlist, and he's also a musician, songwriter, husband, and father. So it's great to have you here, Avrum.
Thank you.
I didn't say this on the other episode, but I think that podcast about your movies one got me through the pandemic in a small way. It was a little bright evening on my walk with my dog.
That's great.
So today's episode is about the family diagram, which is something that Dr. Bowen developed in about the mid-1950s. I think his first sort of handwritten diagram is in a book that we can post a link to by Butler, right?
Yep,
Jack Butler. And some people might have heard the word genogram or genogram. Gets said both ways, I think. And it can be used to refer to a family diagram. And I think it's something that a lot of counselors or psychologists from different backgrounds will sort of be aware of. But today we're talking about, from a Bowen family theory perspective, what is a family diagram? So who wants to jump in?
I'll tackle it.
Perfect.
Okay, so this is what I came up with here. So a genogram or family diagram is a map that is used to describe the emotional terrain of the relationships in your family. And I was thinking, when I came up with that line, about a map. And I'm going to reference Vancouver because we have Katie on this call. So, if you want to get to, for people who aren't from Vancouver, listen to this. There's a beach in Vancouver called Kitsilano Beach. And the beach extends around, but there's a part of Vancouver near UBC. It's the endowment lands. It's a forest, essentially. And if you know the endowment lands, then you know how to navigate it. But if you're new in Vancouver, you'll get lost in those. And if you want to get to the beach on the other side of the endowment lands, okay, you need a map. And there's different paths you can go, and some are longer, and some might take you to a beach called Wreck Beach. You might not want to go to that one. I don't know. It's up to you. It's up to you. But you want the right path, and you need to know where you want to go. And if you think about people who come into our practice, people who are working on something, they want to get somewhere. People don't go to therapy because they have nothing better to do. They are somewhere at the trailhead of their lives, and they want to get to the beach. They want to get somewhere. And the question is, what is the path that's going to lead you there? And I find that a genogram a family diagram is a map that allows you to look at the terrain of your family, pick a path, and start heading there.
Very good.
Katie,
I can go what about you? Yeah.
I could pick up on some of those ideas. I didn't use the word map. That's a good one. I have gotten lost in the endowment lands and ended up very much farther than I wanted to be. So I think I just said, this is a picture to observe the functioning of the family. And I think, I like to put to see how we're all connected, that I could use Bowen's terms and talk about the emotional unit or the family ego mass, but I think to see in the way that multi-generational patterns exist in families, and this is one way to look at that, and to make them come alive, right? I think I think there's something about us as humans that when we see something in front of us, we understand it differently than if we just heard it. I think that's why we like media, right? That's why we like looking at things. And I think the family diagram is a way to see, there's 3 generations of my family where the oldest child was always a male, and just to be interested in what does that mean versus on my dad's side where that didn't take place. So just to get interested in those patterns. And I'm going to do my little push for Bowen theory here too, because I think the thing that's different about Bowen theory is that if you just do the picture, if you just go into ancestry.com and watch watch the way that they do their map, that is not the purpose of using a family diagram in Bowen theory. The purpose of using that family diagram is to begin the work on differentiation, which I know is an episode that we did here. So it's not just looking at, these are my grandparents, these are my aunt and uncles, but what do we see about patterns when tension arises in the family? What does this family do? What do they continue to do? Who tends to do the worst in multi-generations? Is that youngest female always seem to be the one who gets caught in families? So really, it's not just drawing the picture, but then to think about where, like this, that Avrum started, such a good start. Where is my map that I'm then going to take the work? So that's my pitch. That's really long.
Yeah. Very good. Well, mine was, I like to call a family diagram a spicy family tree. That's usually how I introduce it to my clients, a spicy family tree. So it's similar to what people put together when they work on a genealogy, but a family shows not only the who, what, when, where of individuals, it shows the who, what, when, where between people and generations. And so this in-between information is shown with connecting lines with these 4 patterns that we've been talking about. So a line for distance, a line for conflict. You draw a triangle between people. You draw up and down arrows for over and under functioning. And so a family diagram is a way to observe what a family has done to manage the challenges of life over generations. So that was my pitch. And then I actually didn't take from Dr. Bowen this time. I took from Dr. Kerr's family evaluation book. And he writes, the family diagram is an outgrowth of family systems theory. The diagram reflects the ebb and flow of emotional process through the generations. It defines the vicissitudes of a living organism, the multi-generational family. And I don't know, vicissitude is a big word, sort of the up and down, the challenges, that kind of thing. So yeah, what do we notice in those 4 pitches? What stands out?
Well, I think what I'd like to do, just for a moment, just to share how this has helped me do some of the work, because I think at risk sometimes you do this whole family diagram because you gotta do it. It's what we do. You gotta make a diagram, right? And so, what do you do with it though? How does it work? So this is something that happened with me. So I was doing it back when I was learning systems theory, and I sort of it was pretty obvious. I noticed that on my maternal side, my grandfather was kind of cut off and distant from all of his relatives. But so what? I wasn't close with them. He wasn't close with them. Who cares? So as a 24, 25-year-old, it didn't mean anything to me at that point. But then my grandfather died. And there was something, I don't know if you guys have gone through this, but if you lose touch with one generation and there's still, let's say, a living brother or sister, so your great uncle or great aunt, sometimes it takes a death for you to go, I don't know very much about what life was like in Poland, for example. So I wasn't doing this for differentiation of self. I just got antsy about my grandfather dying, and I reached out to his brother. And I noticed in the family diagram, there was all this cutoff and stuff, but I didn't think about healing cutoff or distant. It's my great uncle, but I reached out to him anyways. And so we're talking and I'm forging a very nice relationship with him. And in the process of this, I say to him something like, and isn't it amazing the way your brother came over from Poland and started this jewelry company, the family business, and did very well. And he looks at me and he goes, that's not what happened. And I'm like, excuse me? And he tells me, I'm not going to get into this now, a whole different story, nothing like what I was told growing up. Well, I call my mom and I tell her, did you know this back? No, that's nonsense. That's ridiculous. But I knew enough about reactivity to suggest people don't get that reactive when there isn't a story there. So I kept getting these stories from my great uncle. Well, wouldn't you know it? It started explaining my own chronic anxiety around money and success. And I didn't draw all that together. I didn't pull all that together about my chronic anxiety around money and stuff and this family secret until I started doing this work. So what's delicious about this work sometimes is we think we're going on over here, but as Mick Jagger said, what is it? You can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you get what you need. And it really helped me understand that there's this chronic anxiety in my family to the degree that we tell stories around certain things to fluff things up, to make them look better than they are. It's just one little way that a genogram helped me uncover a family secret that has helped uncover my own chronic anxiety around money and work.
Not this episode, but I just appreciate thinking about cutoff and just how fun it can be to sometimes hear the different interpretations from different members of the family. I think even in my own family, to hear how we both would observe something differently, it's just so interesting. It's so useful to kind of, if you have drawing in the details of the lines in a picture. I like that. That's more cutoff.
Well, and I think I hope I have the technological skills to pop in on our blank screen just an example of what a family diagram looks like. But coming out of the past 4 episodes looking at these patterns, and especially thinking about what we talked about with over and under functioning, that looks different depending on your relationship. And I think I plunk an up arrow next to me because I'm an over functioner, but no, it's only with certain relationships, right? And so, or for example, cutoff. So you put cutoff with sort of like a divided, broken, a line with a really clear split, but that maybe that sibling was a little closer, was a little less cut off with a different family member, and what went into that versus a clear cutoff. And so I think it's just so useful to see, like you've both said, that this visual of the family patterns and relationships.
And I think it's a way that people just see things that they never saw before. I my example was, I said, I don't have a specific one, but I couldn't even begin to count the number of times that I kind of do a family diagram with a family and they'll say, wait a minute, my parents have been married for, 23 years because they celebrated it, but I'm 26 and just had never put together that their parents weren't married until after they were born. Or, I just had one recently where we did a few generations and there was a divorce every time after 2 children were born. Just this pattern of kind of, that was how much tension that marriage could tolerate, and then it couldn't tolerate it anymore. And just to watch and think about, maybe it doesn't change everything, but man, I'll tell you, that person went away thinking, I'm thinking about having a second kid. Can my marriage, how do I get better prepared to not keep doing the same thing that keeps happening in my family? So I just think it's a way people see things that they never saw before.
And Katie, then also what I find is the opposite happens also, where you'll sit there and you'll say, oh, there's an 8-year gap between you and your sister. What's the story? Nothing, just 8 years. I'm like, well, I don't know. And then they go away, right? They leave the session still with the idea that nothing, but a seed's been planted. They come back to the session and go, I spoke to my dad and I didn't know about the 3 miscarriages and how, and then blah, 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 blah. And you don't get there without, I don't know about you folks. I am a big sucker for nice aesthetics. Like I like a nice pen. I like things that look good. And that's one of the things I loved about Monica McGoldrick's work with some of her diagrams and how she uses symbols and stuff. And I think we are a society, a visual society. Dixie, you were saying before about audio, not the audio part, but the visual stuff. We're a very visual society. And I think that without being able to see these things, we just take whatever's happening in our family for granted. It's just what it is. But sometimes when you see something that you don't see when you just hear something. And I think it's a very powerful tool when it works.
Yeah. Well, and I think what Katie was already highlighting was through the movement of time. So a family diagram would mark births and deaths, and it would, marriages and divorces. But I know, Avram, you do specifically more like a timeline. So maybe you want to just describe how this fits into just looking at what's the family been doing.
Well, first of all, I feel like what I'm about to do is what's that called when you're breaking a religious text, when you're violating a religious text? What's that called? Blaspheme. I feel like I'm about to
Okay.
I feel like I'm about to
heresy.
blaspheme Bowen, some of the canon of Bowen literature. I have to tell you, I find the family diagram helpful, but I've actually found some problems with the family diagram. If I might be mistaken, but I think Murray Bowen did as well. I don't think the late Dr. Bowen was thrilled with Monica McGoldrick's work and where she went with the family diagram. Here's the problem I have with it, and why I use a timeline. In some ways, it's more instrumental as a tool. If I'm working with a family on a Wednesday and we do a full diagram, and my client says, I have a very conflictual relationship with my sister, and they come back a week later, and now they're getting along. Okay, so now you cross out the thing. Now you're getting along. But then they say, we get along now. But if you think about it, in a month we're going to a dance, and I'm going to be really pissed off. And so I find that the diagram is helpful, like any tool, it's helpful, but it is a snapshot in time. And it does lock things into place, which does not really capture the fluidity and organic part of relationships. And I find that people, when they rely on the diagram too much, I just don't really think it captures emotional process the way I understand emotional process. So what I found is much more useful, and just to be clear, this was an accident. I did not come up with this. Client comes into my office one day. They were talking about their depression is acting up, and I went back to some of the old Freudian stuff I did with dreams, which is if you have a bad dream, you say, okay, well, what was happening the night before you dreamt? What about the day before? What about 2 days before? And what happens with dream stuff, someone will go, oh my God, that's true. My best friend, blah, 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 blah. And that makes sense with the bus that was, missed an elk, and, they do that thing. And so I would draw it out on the whiteboard there, and with depression, it's, so your dad, okay, so your dad's worried about cancer, but he doesn't have it. That was 4 days ago. And then your wife. So I started doing that more with clients around symptoms. And then I just went from my graphic design background, and I had a graphic designer design for me specific icons that represent nodal events, just because I like something clean and nice. And so I had all these icons drawn up around death, illness, renovations and moves, like the big stuff. And then it took me about 2.5 years to find a piece of software that I can have each row represent an individual in a family. And I would put icons in this, and then I would use a special icon for a symptom. And what I started noticing is that if you place a symptom of a panic attack on its own, I had a panic attack on a Wednesday, it doesn't actually mean very much. But when you start clustering the nodal events, that usually predates a symptom by months, perhaps. I don't have to say anything to clients. They'll just sit there and go, wow, it was a busy I mean, I knew it was busy, but I didn't, because you're thinking about yourself. But what if you have the line on top of you, your husband, and then your kid, and then your mother, and then your father? It just pops out at you. And it's been such a valuable tool to show clustering and symptoms. And the organic part is, because I do 5 years, you really can sort of see the ebbs and the flows of the waves of one's life over 5 years. It's been such a helpful tool. And I think my clients get a lot out of it as well.
And I think I'm gonna take that and run with it, because I think that's so useful, because I think a little bit of what you're talking about is not getting out of that hyper focus on the here and now, that 5-year span does allow that. And I can see, when I've used a timeline and sat with that, I'm always amazed when you write these things down and people are like, wow, yeah, there's been a lot going on in my life, to think about. But also, I think I'm going to circle us back. I also think that's the usefulness of looking up, right? To see, not just to get stuck in the here and now, but to look at up in the generations of how has the family handled moves, or how has the family handled, money going up and down in the system, to kind of, I think that there's something, I know someone in the theory who says part of what what Bowen theory can do that's useful is it distracts people from the symptom enough to calm down and have better thinking about it. And I think, these things, there's some truth to that, is if I'm hyper focused on something I'm anxious about, that's less useful to me. If I can look at it in a more broad perspective, whether I look at it in the context of time or in the context of time in the generations, it just loosens me up a little bit.
Yeah, I have to say, sorry, Dixie, is it okay if I just jump in one thing?
Yeah.
I have to say, it's funny, Katie, just to come back to my late supervisor, David Freeman. He used to say that a therapist has 1 or 2 sessions with a couple when they come in, they're all fused and focused on their partner or whatever's going on. He said, these people who come, especially for us as family systems therapists, a lot of my clients have seen other therapists before, and they come in with a sort of hopelessness about the whole thing. How he used the family diagram, he said, just getting someone to look at a whiteboard and not into the eyes of their spouse or into the therapist, but to look at something out there provides enough of like a squirrel, distraction, right? To sort of expand. And it's almost like you're forcing people to expand the problem beyond this monster you married, right? And so you see a more expanded problem. And that alone is that if they could leave the first or second session with just a little bit of hope that there's a different way to understand this, look at it from a different angle, like when you're in an art gallery and you're looking at a painting in this way, he said they leave with a bit of hope. He goes, if you can't get a couple, I'm not saying he's correct, this is his idea, if they leave after 2 sessions and they're still sitting there going, I don't see any way out of this. He just said that, a lot of these people either won't come back or they'll give it another few sessions and they're done. So he really believed it was a therapist's job to expand it. He saw the genogram as a tool to do that.
Well, I was curious as you were talking, Avrum, what your icon for global pandemic or societal dumpster fire might be, because that would be expanding even more to what has gone on in the world that, the family is a part of too.
Well, the truth is, Dixie, my experience anyways with people is that what's a dumpster fire to me is not a dumpster fire to you. And with all due respect to therapists, I'm sorry, I'm going to say something that might sound a little controversial. Therapists tend to swing on one side of the political. I think they forget that there's a whole other part. And so I think that what's a dumpster fire to what. So when people come to my office and I'm doing a timeline and they say, I'm really getting anxious about, you can insert whatever the political thing is. I use an icon of a note because it's neutral. Because I don't want to get into anything specific, but the political person that you're getting very anxious about, right, might be different than your spouse or your kid, right? So it's a note. It's just a note. And I just wish that therapists would get a little more neutral about this stuff. I'm sorry, but I'm going to say it. I think our colleagues are sometimes, I think they like to think that they're not as partisan as they are, but I'm sorry. The past 5-6 years, I have been shocked at positions that have been taken and have been very not neutral. And I don't think that's helpful to our clients. And I don't think it's helpful to the societal regression, which is a different topic.
Yeah.
I'm done.
I was going to say just the topic, like make a note, Dixie, because I just think the topic of what goes into a therapist attempting to be neutral in a session is so useful, because I think that is something that's important and talked about in Bowen theory, is how once we slip out of our neutrality, we are in the system, right? Because we're reactive in some way. And I think we're humans, so we're going to get reactive. And, but I think that's a good pin for another time.
Well, and even thinking about looking up the generations, I had a grandfather who was a part of the World War, or the Second World War, right? And if you think about some of those big events, he was actually also born in the middle of the Spanish flu, right? So thinking about how some of those broader, world events would have impacted is, I think, just another interesting piece wherever you land on the
Yeah,
which
just what
side
was
of it.
going on. What was the societal process in that time? I said one thing I never knew that it would happen as I became a family therapist is I would begin to get interested in history and time periods and what was happening in different parts of the world. Um, at different time periods, because it would shape a family. It would shape how they respond to the tension. And maybe, like I appreciate that, one person's dumpster fire isn't another's. And to think about
Yeah.
what do we learn about our family during World War II, for example? What was that a challenging time? Was it a less challenging time? Maybe that, just thinking about that within the family system.
Yeah. I recently had the opportunity to look at a specific time period in my own family's life, and I created the family diagram kind of around that moment. And then, of course, I've done, created the family diagram today, right, with my kids and the next generation, and just to see what are the patterns that are similar, where have the shifts been. And so, I mean, in a sense, sort of putting the timeline with the family diagram. And I know it's Patrick Stinson, right, that has the app, which I would love to try, but I haven't tried yet, that can really, in a sort of a seamless thing, show the different patterns through
I
the
think
years.
that's what, yeah, I would say his app really, you could pick a time and then press play, and it just shows you how the family shifts in time. And I think that is kind of gets at that missing piece. I did it by hand once and tracked triangles in my family, just try to kind of be objective as possible over the years. And it does look different, right? People are moved towards and away from others. So I think, I'm going to punch up the assessment part. I think it tells me as a clinician a lot about a family, right? You'd all have the family that's walked, or the individual that's walked into your office and doesn't know if their parent had siblings, or if they were the oldest or the youngest, or where their grandparents are. So I think it also just is a quick snapshot for me as a therapist to be interested in, where this person might sit on that scale of differentiation, which I know we probably will talk about in another time. Just it gives me some interest to be curious in different areas.
And I love how you highlighted, Avrum, that it can go from, this is what it looks like for a decade, but then the variability week to week or hour to hour in terms of, oh, no, we're close, or no, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, well, any other examples or usefulness? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that I have used family diagrams for in a fun way. For example, I love the Godfather movies. So Godfather 1, Godfather. The third one, but the first two are unbelievable. I must have seen them 6, 7 times. And every time I'm watching them, there'll be a little part of it where I can recognize the characters, but there's so many moving pieces in these films, like the Godfather in particular. Who's that mob and why are they? And then I said, you know what? I'm going to make a family diagram, right, as I'm watching The Godfather. And I did. All of a sudden, things started popping out at me that I was like, oh, that's the brother-in-law of, which when you think about it, it's really hard to follow, right, as a movie goes on. So then I started doing it with novels, because I find I'll get into a novel, but I'll forget, is that the so I'm doing it with novels. And I think I mentioned to you, Katie, a few months ago, I'm now doing genograms for all of my favorite movies that I think depict marriage and family in a very interesting way. So I've done 3 Woody Allen movies. I've done Fiddler on the Roof. I've done all the Godfathers. And I'm going to create a blog around this. And I've also cut out so instead of squares for men and circles for women, I've actually taken the faces of the actors and shrunk them down. And so you can download Godfather 1. I've done the whole film. Again, it's my interpretation. Katie would have a different interpretation. I've used the symbols more or less. It's not perfect because characters change right throughout a film. But if you want to watch the film now and you're interested in family systems theory, I'm going to create a blog around this. And it's been a really fun way to use diagram. Get to know the theory better also. So I use it. That's how one creative way I've been trying to use this tool.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if one of you wants to comment on the idea that the family diagram is really going towards facts versus, like, sort of you alluded to, Avrum, like each therapist, I guess, will have a bit of an interpretation, or each family member might have a different interpretation. But really the goal is these are the facts of the family. And, I've thought about, in my own family, where I would say, oh, I'm close with my parents. 2 lines. My brothers would say, Dixie is fused as hell with her parents. You know what I mean? And so how do you get around what is the fact, right? Yeah. Any thoughts on how you get to facts versus
Dixie, I share the same concern. I was hoping you were going to share an answer. No, it's tricky. I don't know. Katie, maybe
I was going to borrow from someone. I have Victoria Harrison, which I was going to list as my resource, because I think her family diagram and family research book is probably the number one recommendation I would give to people when they're trying to think about this and use it. And I just appreciate that she has this list on page 14 of all the kind of facts. She says, facts of functioning add flesh and bones to the family diagram. And so like migration and geographical moves, in our training program, we've had quite a few different interns talk about how migration and immigration have impacted the functioning in their family. And it's been so useful to watch that. Or education, who got educated, who didn't, military service, work history, criminal history, health history. I mean, you could track symptoms. I've had families track symptoms, mental health or physical symptoms through a family. Social symptoms. So who's drinking? I always think that's useful to think about who does and who doesn't on a system. Reproduction, deaths, and then facts of functioning. In Victoria Harrison's book, she talks about these stressful life events. So there's this scale that's been around, I think, since the 70s. It doesn't say in here. 67. So I was close. That talks about all these stressful life events, to just think of how does a family system respond to death of a spouse, divorce, separation, imprisonment, death of a child. How did the family transition if there was a death of a child, pregnancy, sexual difficulties, gaining a new family member, business readjustment. I think there's 50 on this list, so I'm not going to read them all. But I think that they're just all different ways that one can begin to be curious about how their family does this. And then, I just said, it's kind of, I always think it's a little bit of the magic when people look at this and they think, oh my goodness, I am doing the exact same thing that like my grandparents did when, and maybe it's not the same exact, right? We're in different times, but a very similar pattern and a way of responding to different stress. So I just think it's always so interesting to watch people take that. And, there's, a movie that's not coming to my mind where someone will talk about that. They have like the family behind them, supporting them and having their back, and I think that is one of the ways that I think when people do a family diagram and they think, well, there's 4 generations of women who have been up against this challenge in their life. And I have them on my side. Like they made it through. I'm here. So how do I use that kind of resource of the family of knowing that people in my system have done this and made it through? Got a little preachy at the end. Sorry.
Well, and actually, when you were talking, my brain almost went to a different way, thinking about there's so much discussion these days of, multi-generational trauma and the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. You can score that and say you would have siblings. Maybe they're like 1 or 2 years apart. They might get the same ACEs score, but they've done things differently. So where is what's the word you always use, Katie? Not the diversity, but the variability in you got it. In the way people adapt to these challenges.
I don't know. I heard this from someone, and I haven't implemented this yet. I'm curious if either of you have tried this. I want to say it was Kathy Wiseman. Is that her name? Kathy Wiseman?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It might have been her. I'm not sure. But they said, money is an interesting. I don't know what you folks in my practice. Money is. I find that if you want to peer into the eye of the soul of someone in a family of origin way, just talk about money. It's just an interesting one. What this person recommended is they do a 3-generation family diagram, and the only fact they put on, and then the idea is, what's the narrative? Salary. So how much did your grandfather make a year? Just guess, whatever it was. Your father. It tells you 2 things. First of all, people say, I don't know, or a lot. What's a lot? That just right there says something about your own chronic anxiety or what you've inherited in maturity about money. But often people will put down, right, as much as they can about the year. People can get very ashamed by this, strong reactions. Have either of you put down the actual amount? How much do you make a year? How much does your spouse make a year? Have you ever tried that?
I haven't done it that way. I've had a supervisor talk about if there has been anxiety around money, if people get real anxious around it, to just look through the past and see if there was like a windfall in one way or the other. To kind of just be interested if there's something coming chronically down about that. But that would be a more factual way. Sounds interesting.
Yeah. One of my papers for first year at Living Systems was interviewing my dad, who's a wills and estates lawyer and who knows nothing about Bowen theory, but just having him talk, and it was just all the patterns and how one generation, where the tension end up around an estate, and then the same in the next generation. It was very, very interesting.
Yeah, money's always it's a factor to watch in a family.
I'm going to do it, by the way, for no other reason than there's the impish part of me that just wants to try it and see what my clients will say, But I think it would be such a fascinating thing to get a 3-generation map of that, and just to see the reaction. I'm going to do it. You see, this podcast with nothing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to report back to you guys. I'm going to try this.
And which of the siblings would know and which wouldn't? That would be so interesting to think, right? Like, maybe
I
there's
bet you people in families know more about, in some way, sexual stuff or something than they do about the facts about money. There's something about money that gets people very, very, at least in my practice, I find people get very itchy.
And the facts is the key, right? Like, I like that salary piece because...
Well, that's it. It's a fact. I mean, how much you make a year?
Fact versus, they had everything. Well, that doesn't mean they were making a lot of money.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Go straight to the tax returns, right? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if we're talking about money, I think it's a great time to end because it's one of my not favorite topics. What about, takeaways? Katie, you brought up Victoria Harrison's family diagram, family research book. I was going to mention one of my favorite things at the end of Dr. Kerr's Bowen Theory Secrets is 4 chapters. I think it's Adam Lanza. Is it John Nash, the Beautiful Mind movie?
Yeah.
4 different, the Unabomber, 4 different people. He does the family diagrams. He goes through sort of the life events in the family just to see how does this moment in time, that we all know about. It was just very helpful. And I think for me, the family diagram is just, you see the system, right? There's perhaps no more useful way to see the system. So, well, that's our time, I guess. I want to thank Avrum for joining. And now I'm supposed to leave room for you to say thanks, Dixie, or I have a tendency to just keep talking. But it was really great to have you here, Avrum.
That's wonderful. And you know what? It's great to have different ways of thinking about and talking about theory. So I am looking forward to the whole series.
Yeah, great. And I want to thank our audience for listening. And I hope that you can take away something today with systems thinking that you can use as you go out into your relationships. This podcast is produced by Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver offering counseling and training programs in Bowen family systems theory across Canada.